Hello everyone, it's Kingdom Silver here, and in today's video I'm talking about my two favorite topics, sports and silver. We are discussing the incredible story of how an NFL owner, along with his brothers, cornered the market on silver and the major mistake that they made that cost them everything. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the video. Thank you so much for checking out the channel. Let's dive in. So as you can see here, I have a mini helmet that is signed by Clark Hunt, and Clark Hunt is the current owner of the Kansas City Chiefs, of course, being from the Kansas City area. I am a big fan of the Chiefs, more of a baseball fan, but a fan of the Chiefs nonetheless. And this story is about Clark Hunt's father, Lamar Hunt, and how he and his brothers cornered the market on silver. So I must confess that I did not know about this story on silver. I had not heard of this before. Now, in fairness, right, I wasn't born when all of this happened, so, cut me a little slack, but I ran across the story. Actually, a friend of mine brought this story up to me a couple of weeks ago, and I thought to myself, wow, we've got to cover this, right? We have got to share this with other people because I found it absolutely fascinating. So how the story goes is it actually starts when the H.L. Hunt, who was the father of Lamar plus his two brothers, which we'll mention in a minute, passed away in 1974. And he was a big oil tycoon. For those that have not heard of the Hunt family, they're famously out of Texas. And Lamar, and especially though, and there's some different articles on this, I've seen different things depending upon the article on how much, Lamar was involved with this process. He definitely was somewhat. However, it seems like his brothers, Nelson Bunker Hunt and William Herbert Hunt, who were both involved with the oil business, just like Lamar, were really driving the train, especially Nelson, from what it sounds like. So the brothers at the time were seeing the market for silver. They were looking at the inflationary pressures that were going on during the early 70s, going into the early 80s, and seeing the decreasing value of the dollar, and were looking at commodities like silver, being very familiar with the oil industry, and said, hey, I think that there's a chance of a potential radical increase in silver. And so what they started to do was buy up the supply of silver that was available. And so instead of settling for cash payments, like often a lot of people did, they were taking physical delivery of the silver, and then they just continued to do so, and they continued to accumulate and accumulate. And it's estimated, but by early 1979, in the 1979 era, they owned almost 2/3 of the world's supply of silver. 2/3 of the supply of silver being owned by one family. That is incredible. And because of this, it really drove up the price. So when they first got involved with this, it was in the early 70s, and silver was around $2 an ounce. And by the time that they got this huge stockpile, silver was between 20-25 an ounce, and as we would know, would hit its all-time high of around 50 ounces. And it was actually at such a pace. And one of the articles said this, I thought it was kind of funny. Actually, Tiffany's & Co., the famous jewelry maker, actually took out a full-page ad in the New York Times criticizing the Hunt brothers, saying, and I quote, "We think it's unconscionable for anyone to hoard several billion, yes, $1 billion worth of silver, and thus drive up the price of silver so high that others must pay artificially high prices for articles made of silver." And that is a quote from their article. And so silver actually reached a high of $48.70 per ounce on January 18th, 1980. So that is just incredible. The fact, right, that two brothers were able, or three, I should say, Lamar being a part of that, to be able to take on that much silver is incredible. However, they made a big mistake. And the big mistake that they made is that as opposed to, purchasing silver, taking delivery of that, and then maybe turning those profits around, paying off, any loans or anything that was going on, any margin, they were using margin using margin to purchase this silver. So basically they were taking out loans from a bunch of different banks, and they were oil tycoons and people would love to get their business. They had a good reputation. They were taking out loans to finance this silver purchase. And so what happened in their downfall of the Hunts is that the COMEX actually set up some rules, the Super 7 rule, which they used this rule to then make sure that it limited how much you could purchase on margin. And then on top of that, actually, there is an insinuation in one of the articles, and I'll have all of this in the comments to my video so that you can read all these articles and kind of get the best picture for yourself. The U.S. government actually stepped in and started discouraging banks from loaning to the brothers. And so what happened is this started putting pressure on the Hunt brothers to meet their margin calls. And this is where Silver Thursday came into effect, and the price of silver halved in a day because the Hunt brothers just couldn't meet the margin. They couldn't meet the calls that were coming in on the price of silver, and then everything just collapsed. So unfortunately, it did not end the best in this part of the story for the Hunt brothers. In August 1988, they were put in front of a federal grand jury, and they were ordered to pay more than $130 million in damages for conspiring to corner the world's silver market. And then in September of 1988, they declared bankruptcy. So it was not a good ending for the Hunts. However, the family has recovered, right? Especially Lamar's side with Clark. They've been able to really, I think, resurrect some of this. Again, from what it sounds like from reading the articles, he was not as major of a player. But just a really fascinating story. And I think the biggest lesson here is that a couple of lessons that we can learn from the story is, one, don't purchase on leverage, right? This isn't a good idea, especially large things. It's one thing to be smart and play some, margin calls, but when you're doing that much volume in margin, on leverage, trying to purchase up silver or any commodity, you're going to run into trouble. And then the second thing that I think we learned is, it's hard for any couple of people to corner the market on silver. And we've, I think as silver investors, as silver stackers, we've really wanted to see the price of silver skyrocket, and it has increased, but we really haven't seen it take off the way that we really want it to. And I think it's going to involve everyone. I think if there's any lesson another lesson that I'm taking from this is that it's going to take an entire group of people to take out the supply of silver. It's not just going to be a couple of people, because as we saw in this story, COMEX can change rules. The U.S. government can step in. You have to do this. It has to really take a village. That story of, raising kids, that phrase, it takes a village. It's going to take a village to change the price of silver, but I think we can get there. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, a little bit different than what I normally do, but I thought it was fun to cover this story, to cover how the market of silver changed so drastically in the 70s and 80s, and share a story that for some stackers you may never heard of before. So with that, we're going to end the video. Thank you so much for watching today. Be blessed. Be a blessing to others. We'll see you later.